Hello everybody and welcome back to the Imagine Crafts channel. It's Nicole here, and today I have a little bit of an organization project for you. I started swatching all of my ink colors about a year ago when I switched to all these different companies because I really needed to know what colors I had going on, and I wanted an easy way to be able to pull out colors and color match them without having to stop in the middle of a project to figure out what color was just the right color. So now I make it a habit that when I receive new inks that I go ahead and I swatch them out right away, and then I have my little catalog that continues on. If it is an ink that I can do in watercolor, I will do that as well. So for example, I have these Encore pads. I have them done in both stamped and watercolored. The Memento Luxe I have stamped and watercolored, and then when I get a chance I'll go back through and do the watercolor version of the Versa Magics, just like I've done the stamped ones. So we're going to work on some Versa Magic today, and I will show you how I put together my swatches, and I'm using a stamp set from Waffle Flower. This is their color swatches stamp set, which I've done some stamp surgery on, and then the ink pad color swatches for ink pads. This is what I use for stamping all of those little spaces. All right, so we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I cut out all of these swatch blanks, and I've created a template for my silhouette so that I can just use my e-cutter to cut these out and I don't have to hand cut all of them. I made them kind of decorative, like a little card that you would put into like a Rolodex, and I really do like the way they look, so I just keep doing that. And I have some in watercolor and some in Nina Solar White, and I always use the same kind of cardstock so that I know I'm going to get the exact results every time. So when I'm setting this up, I like to stamp a whole bunch of these at the same time, so I use my stamp positioner, and I'm going to take a couple of pieces from the Waffle Flower set, and I just set them up on top of one that I've already done, so that way I don't have to guess about the spacing and that kind of thing. So just pop these in place, and then like I said, I had done some stamp surgery on this long stamp here, so I have just a set of 3 that I cut apart, and that goes here, and then I have my template set up for stamping all of my blanks. So I'm using Versafine Clair. I love using the Versafine Clair because it gives me a nice crisp image. It works well with the other inks as I'm stamping them, so I don't have to worry about it bleeding. They dry quickly, and it always looks just absolutely gorgeous. So I go through and I stamp a whole bunch of these, and then I let them dry, and then we can get to the color part. Okay, so the last step before we can move on to color is to add this little black line here. Now, it's not required, but if you do want to test out your inks fully and understand their transparency and things like that, definitely add in this little line. So it's this tiny stamp from the color swatches for ink pads. And again, I'm just using my Versafine Clair, and it goes in between these 2 lines here. So just pop those on and let them dry, and then when you put the ink over the top, you will see how transparent the color is. So we'll put a second line on top, and then you'll see the difference between the 2 blacks, and you'll be able to tell how transparent it is. See how you can tell the difference? All right, so these are dry, and we're now done with our Versafine Clair. So let's take a look at some Versa Magic. I have some dewdrops here. And I do like the smaller ink pads just because you can get more of them for less, and the storage is super easy, right? So I'm going to take this long rectangular one and then this extra long one. And these are the 2 stamps that we're going to use for the stamped versions here. So I always write on here the color, the type of ink, and then if it comes from a specific color family, like these are the Versamagic line. So this is Perfect Plumeria. And I can't talk and write at the same time. And this is it is a chalk ink. And then it's from the Versamagic line. And then I always add the brand down here. It'll really help you learn how to spell the word sukaneko. Okay, so I just write all that on there. And then I take my dewdrop and I'm going to ink up this long line here. Now this is called the mass tone. And this is giving you an idea of what that color looks like in mass and solid. So I always tend to stamp it twice just to make sure that I get a good impression. And I did go outside the lines, but I really don't care about that so much. I really just want to make sure that I get the color on there. All right, and then I'm going to do something similar to start on the right side or the left side of this area here. Now this is the gradation piece, and on the left side I'm going to stamp the image. Again, I'll probably do it twice just to make sure I get a good impression, but these are nice and inked up, so I shouldn't really have to worry about it. And then I'm going to do what's called second generation stamping. So I'm going to stamp it off once onto a piece of scrap and then stamp it on the right side. And that allows me to understand what it looks like when it is basically half strength. And you can see now that how it's already covered that black line. So when I put that other black line over the top, we'll see how it reacts. All right, so I have these all done up here and I'm waiting for them to dry. So while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and do the watercolor versions. And a lot of inks can be watercolored. So you just have to know a little bit about the medium and if it will work. And if you're not sure, I always suggest you give it a try with one color and see how it turns out. And then from then on, you should know if that particular ink series will watercolor or not. So this is a chalk ink, which means that it should have no problems with watercolor. So chalk inks, quite a few pigment inks will watercolor. Of course, dye and water-based inks will watercolor. If it's a solvent-based ink like StazOn, you're not going to be able to watercolor with that because it just doesn't mix with water, right? So go ahead and add a little bit of this tea leaves color, and I have my swatch all set up here. This is a piece of 140-pound watercolor cardstock, and I'm just going to add some water to it. And so this is your first clue if you don't know if it's going to watercolor or not. Does it mix with water well to begin with? And this mixes amazing with water. It just loosens right up and blends in, and look at how gorgeous that is. So I know that I'm probably going to be using these Versamagics for watercoloring quite a bit. So I fill in the mass tone in all solid color, and then I come back and I fill in the left half of my gradation area. And this is where the gradation really comes into play. So I'm going to extend out a little bit here in the full color, and then I'm going to take my watercolor brush and just put it into the water halfway and dilute it a little bit, and then come in here and put in that diluted shade and kind of blend it in, and then I do that again for yet another lighter shade, and then one last time for the lightest shade. And this way you can really see how that is going to shade out when you start to add more water to it. All right, so that's all you need to do for the watercolor version, and when we come back we'll do some testing. All right, so everything is dry and I've started my testing, and I wanted to pull in a different sample for some contrast here. So this is Memento Luxe, and you can see that in the watercolor sample I have some lighter color here, and this has to do with the staining. So just remember that as we go through the testing here. So I will move on to the Tea Leaves Versamagic here, and I'm going to check first for transparency. So we already know that this black line got covered, so let's look at it For contrast, we'll put a new black line on the top, and you can see that the difference is significant, but you can still see the original black line. So that would be considered semi-transparent. And so I'll just go ahead and fill in half the black so I understand that this is a semi-transparent ink. All right, and the staining indicates in this area here, and I'm going to just use some fresh watercolor, or just some fresh water with my watercolor brush, and put it on here and try to get some of that ink to come up. I'm kind of dabbing on it a little bit, and it doesn't really seem to be moving. So then I take a piece of paper toweling and just dab it on there, and I didn't get any green to come up, and the sample still looks exactly the same. So this is truly like a permanent ink, and it's completely staining, which means that you're not going to get that ink to move or come up after you've put it down. All right, so granularity on a stamped image is nothing that we're concerned about, and then light fastness is something that I really don't test for because I'm primarily a card maker. That's important if you're doing paintings that are going to be exposed to the light. You want to know the light fastness of your ink, and that testing takes a few months because you put it in front of a window to see how it fades compared to a version of it that you've covered up. So now we move on to the watercolor one and do the same testing. So you can see that even if I watercolor with these, they are semi-transparent. So again, I will fill in that black. And then I want to check for my staining level. So again, I will put some water here in the center and see if I can get any of that ink to come up. Now again, I have a suspicion that I'm really not going to get much of anything, and I certainly didn't. So this one is definitely a fully staining ink, fully permanent. And again, really good to know, especially if you're going to watercolor with it, because sometimes when you watercolor, if you don't fix your projects at the end, if it gets wet again, it will ruin the project, right? So perhaps you would want to use this for watercoloring because you know that it's going to be permanent, it's going to stay in place. If it happens to get wet, it's not going to come up, right? So that's kind of a nice feature for watercoloring, as long as you know that that's the case. You're not going to be able to come back and re-wet this and move the water around afterwards. So if you're working on a project multi-day, perhaps this isn't the right medium for you to be using. But those are all the things that you learn when you're doing swatches like this. So the last thing I wanted to share is what I use these for on the side here. So I combined the tea leaves and the jumbo java, and I got this beautiful kind of olivey brown color. And that's how I use these little swatches on the side for favorite color combos. So I put the two original colors in the small blocks and then the color that they make in the large block. And I'll put some notes up here about what color this is here, and then I'll know that I can create this kind of olivey brown if I should need that color in the future. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how I organize all of my colors and how they help me to make informed decisions about the inks that I'll be using for my projects. It might seem like a daunting task at first, especially if you have hundreds of inks, but if you just tackle them little by little, you'll have them all swatched out in no time. Thanks for stopping by today, and come back soon to the Imagine channel. I'll be back later this month, but until next time, happy crafting.